online class, but normal.
I know. See, the future is already here with us, and
Yes,
so now time doesn't seem to matter. Time doesn't seem to matter too much. We have redefined time. It's quite interesting. So now we can do 10 o'clock in Sydney, 8 o'clock in KL.
Yes, because of the future.
Because of the future. Okay. How are you anyway? You're well?
I'm good today.
You're good. Like,
how about you? But Prof, I cannot see your video.
Oh, is that so? That's because I haven't turned it on. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay. You look good today. You look good today.
I look good. You mean I look good today? I didn't look good yesterday? I look good every day.
You look good every day.
I look good every day. Thank you so much. Anyway, it's good to see you guys in KL. I'm very happy. So,
okay. Yes, student, can you on your video, because normally here we have to off our video because the line is not stable.
Okay, so but you can see my video now.
Pardon?
Can you see me now?
Yes, I can see you now, and now I ask the student to actually to on their video for a while just to say hello to you.
That's very nice. Okay, why not? It's a very good idea. Yes. I hope all the students are well, and I'm looking forward to a very nice discussion today. And I hope you can ask lots and lots of questions. Okay, because if you don't ask questions,
for the class,
student, so you're gonna ask questions, okay?
Can you say hi to Prof?
Hello, Prof.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
You can see from his hair.
Yeah, I know as well. You've done well to wake up so early, but you know, I'm told that this is your normal time, so I'm very happy. When I was a student, our classes used to start at 7 o'clock, and I was always
7 o'clock, right now.
Because I was always sleeping. And so 10 o'clock to me, it's a very civilized hour.
In fact, in Surabaya, this is Nadia. Okay, this is also these are all the students. Nadia, say hi to Prof.
Hi, Nadia. How are you?
Where are you, Nadia? Suddenly we lost you.
Yeah, that's okay. As you say, sometimes the line is not so stable. Anyway.
Student, can you on the video for a while and say hi, Marcela?
Marcela, I'd like to see all the faces. Marcela, how are you? You well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and then Nurul Atika. We have Nurul Atika here.
Hi,
hey, I can see you. That's great. You're up early this morning. I can see the sun behind you.
Yeah.
this is really good. You know, I've been telling my students, because this is the third international Zoom lecture I'm doing, but of course with Sydney University for the Law Extension Committee where I teach, we do Zoom classes and Zoom recordings every Friday. And so this Zoom business has been very good for all of us. It's quite nice.
Yes, indeed.
You can see all the photos, right? Their faces.
I used to say I've been telling my students that in the past, in a class, I see about 100 students and I only see their faces without the names. But now on Zoom, I can see the face, I can see the name. So,
yes. How about the others? Anwar Hakim, Farah, can you on your video for a while? Fazwin, Aisha, Naimi, can you on the video for a while? Saira.
Maybe she's looking too sleepy, you see. And so you're looking too sleepy, so you don't want me to see your face. That's okay, but it's nice. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to see this, to see you all guys on Zoom. I assume you are recording that. You are recording it anyway, so I don't have to record it.
Yes, I'm recording the video.
No problem. Okay, no problems.
Okay, so, say hello. So everyone say hello to Prof, and then we can start the class in a short while.
So listen, hello everybody, and now you can disappear. But please
you can disappear.
You can disappear, but please don't leave. Don't go back to bed, okay? Just stay there. Okay.
Okay, Prof.
Okay. I'm just trying to on something on so that we can do the discussion. I'm looking for my PowerPoints. So just bear with me for 1 minute while I look for my PowerPoint. It's here anyway. But
Yes.
the idea is to take you back to it properly. So I'm assuming you can see my screen now. Is it okay?
Let me see. Yes.
You can see my screen?
Yes,
Okay.
you can see your screen.
Okay, if you can see my screen, then we are in business. Good one. Okay, so can we start? Because if you don't start, maybe I'll talk too much.
Let me introduce yourself to.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
I'll wait for your introduction then.
Okay. Good morning, class. Thank you for joining us today. And then I think this is the last class for us for this semester before we go for the final assessment. Okay, and then for the last class, we invited Prof. Sam Blay from Sydney. He has vast experiences in legal education. He's been teaching in many universities, and now he is with one of the prominent university in Australia, a private university, and we are so glad and appreciate for Prof to be here with us today with the student to share some input on the future of the lawyers and the future of the lawyer and law of the future. Okay, we hope that with your sharing, Prof, the students are more prepared for the new normal in the future. So thank you, Prof, and then back to you. Then you can continue with your, you want to do introductions or brief introduction of yourself.
Okay, thank you so much. I think you said so many nice things about me, so I don't really have to introduce myself now. I'm just happy. I'm happy with all the nice words you've said. You know, Siti and I have known each other for a while, and it was a pleasure when she invited me to come and contribute to the your online Zoom discussions. It's a pleasure because, as she just mentioned, I have an interesting background. I'm of course a law professor, but I've done interesting things that law professors don't usually do. I'm so passionate about legal education that not very long ago, I actually founded a law school. You know, you go to dinner and people ask you, what are you doing? You say, actually, I'm just forming a law school. They say, what? Are you forming a law school? A real law school? I said, of course, because I'm passionate about legal education. And as I will soon talk about later today, I'm passionate about legal education because of what I see the future lawyer to be. As we talk today, I'm going to explain something to you. Because in 2015, I used to tell people that I'm doing a law school and that my approach would almost be like the Uber of law schools. In other, I was going
Uber.
to,
Yes.
yeah, the Uber of law schools, because I said,
it's the Indonesian term, right?
yeah,
Uber.
well, Uber, it's of course, you know, it could be the Gojek if you like, or it could do, it's anything of law schools. The idea is that I was going to bring something new to the law school, the approach in which law schools were being developed. And so this is an interesting topic for me today. As Siti was just saying, we're going to talk about the future lawyer and the law of the future. I have to say that when Siti and I were discussing the topic, we had a lot of fun trying to work out how to frame the topic. And eventually we agreed on this, the future lawyer and the law of the future. I know you guys are in your professional year, in your insolvency class, and so we thought it would be nice if we make some comments about the relevance of what we are talking about to, of course, the practice of insolvency. And so we brought up something about insolvency practitioners in a changing world. But of course, the main focus of our discussion today, it's really on the future lawyer and the future of the professions themselves. So let's, shall we say, get started, as I always say to my students these days online. Now let's get started and see. you may have heard a lot of jokes about lawyers. I'm sure. I mean, and by the way, you can stop me as we talk so that we can ask questions. I'm sure you have so many jokes about lawyers. But there's one joke people don't tell because it's not a joke. It's a serious thing. Maybe because it's serious, people don't talk about it as a joke. Now, my invitation to you this morning, early morning in Malaysia, is this. Think about this. I begin by saying that lawyers have 3 lives. Some people say cats have 3 lives. I say cats have 10 lives. I say lawyers have 3 lives. But what do I mean by this? I say as lawyers, particularly from the common law background, we live 3 lives simultaneously. What do I mean by we live 3 lives simultaneously? Look at this. First, I say we live our lives in the past. Particularly if you're from a common world, of course. You live in the past because you constantly look at precedent. As Malaysian law students, you know this already. You go to your law library, all you look for is precedent. And every major case you look at, what the Constitutional Court said, what the Supreme Court said, you just look at it. So as lawyers from the common law, we are hooked on the past. But that's not all. As I said, we live 3 lives simultaneously. What's the second life? This is the second life. We live in the present because we apply the law in the present. It regulates what we do. Lawyers practice in the present by using the past. So here we are, great. I said, we are great at it. Live in the past, live in the present, but what about the future? We live, of course, in the future also, all together. But what do we mean by we live in the future? Well, any great lawyer lives in the future because when you draft a contract, you're actually drafting it not for now, but for future relationships. When you are trying to advise a client, usually you're talking to them about what to expect. In fact, you do what we call preventive practice sometimes. You develop strategies to deal with situations which are likely to arise in the future. So here we are, 3 lives, 1 in the past, 1 in the present, and of course, 1 in the future. But in today's class, we are of course interested in the future. Let's talk about the future. The future to me is fascinating. As I said, I left the UTS in Sydney long ago, determined that I would do something different. And I kept arguing that the lawyers of the future are different. And people look at you and say, what are you talking about? Lawyers of the future? It's like I've lost my mind. But I was so passionate about it that in a way, I'm hooked on the idea of lawyers of the future. But let me leave this slide with a simple observation. My observation is that as young lawyers, in your professional year, getting ready for your pupillage and so on, just think about this. As lawyers, you have no choice. You live 3 lives, 1 in the present, 1 in the past, and 1 in the future. So let's talk about the future. Now, it's interesting. When we talk about the future, what is it that we are on about? The future is a strange concept because as far as I'm concerned, yesterday, Siti and I were talking about today. That was the future, and here we are. We are already in the future. The future, for some strange reason, is always present. But for lawyers, it has a complexity. Now, as I'm talking now, you would have heard of interesting things. So let's begin with some of them. Already we're talking about increasing advances in information technology. You know, a year ago, the technology we have today didn't exist. Not in the form we know it. 10 years ago, the technology we have today didn't quite exist in the way we know it. But here we are now. We are in the future that we were talking about a few years ago. As we said, we are in the iPhone age, the iPad age, and so on. This is the generation that somehow is in the midst of the information technology revolution. But that's not all. We have the rise of the robotics. You know, it's like, you know, the return of the net, or the droids are taking over. Here we are. We have the rise of robotics, and we can talk about robotics and artificial intelligence in a minute. But to me, these are fascinating things we talk about when we talk about the future. Everything we have today is going to be a bit different in the future as we go. And look at some more advances in e-commerce. and the complexity of corporate and related commercial transactions. These will get more interesting as we move towards the future. And in fact, and we'll talk about this in a minute, we'll talk about the COVID situation. But we would deal with situations, we're going to deal a lot with situations in cross-border insolvency in an increasingly global environment. As people do trades and commerce across countries and across borders, here we are confronted frequently and so often with cross-border insolvency. The future is an interesting one, and I will finally talk about this, the online, anytime, anywhere culture. This is it. To me, if anything and anyone is going to talk about the future, this is perhaps the quintessential element about the future, what I call the online, anytime, anywhere culture. You know, when I was growing up, if you wrote to me, it took about 2 weeks to get a reply because we didn't have emails. Now, you know, if somebody writes, they send you a text. If you don't reply in 5 minutes, say, hey, what's wrong with you? Didn't you get my message? We've changed. It's the online, anytime, anywhere. And the beauty about the online, anytime, anywhere culture is, look at me here today. I'm talking to you guys in Malaysia early in the morning. We're talking online, anywhere, anytime. This is the best example. I've already said, I gave some lectures already to students in Surabaya. I've done podcasts for some other people overseas using online resources. And my point is that it's fascinating, isn't it? Because, you know, a year ago, for me to do a lecture in Surabaya, I would have had to go to the airport, grab a plane, sit on the plane for hours, get there, give a lecture. Hey, I was able to do the lecture sitting in my room here. No problems. And they say, oh, we are so sorry. I said, oh no, this is nice. I don't have to travel. It's good. Really, life is good. In fact, I'm beginning to like Zoom. But that's the beauty about what I'm about to talk about. So you see, in this slide, I say, I've titled the slide, The Future. And my point is that when we're looking at the future, because we're talking about the increase in technology and the rise of robotics and advancing commerce and insolvency across borders and an amazing environment in which we can reach each other very easily and very quickly. This has an important impact on us as either law educators, law students, or employment practitioners. So maybe, and I've got a problem, and I invite you to think about this. Maybe when we talk about the future, is it possible that the future is already here? Is it possible? Have we arrived in the future? Because yesterday we talked about the future. We are now. Tomorrow is the future again. But there's a famous song which says, tomorrow never comes. I don't know whether you've heard of it before. The song says, tomorrow never comes, because every day is tomorrow. You know, tomorrow, we arrive tomorrow, they say the next tomorrow. So maybe tomorrow never comes. Perhaps the future is already here. And why do I say so? Take a look at this. We have drones, of course. We're talking drone technology everywhere. And of course, the rise of robotics. It's already here. Then, of course, as if all this is not bad enough or good enough, depending on how you look at it, here we are. Now, what's fascinating about Corona, and no talk these days will be good enough without talking about the pandemic. It's not so much because it's a pandemic, because we didn't used to talk about SARS the same way, but the Corona pandemic has actually enlivened the debate on the future. As I'm talking now, why I say the Corona virus has enlivened the debate on the future is that we are doing courses online because of the virus. Remember, when SARS occurred, we didn't do lectures online like this. This has redefined our way of thinking. Indeed, my own law students here, my colleagues who run law practices, and indeed what's happening in Malaysia today indicates something fascinating. People are having to work from home. Law firms now say, and I will talk about this in a few minutes, that the 9 to 5 culture, where we go to work at 9 o'clock and finish at 5, it's over. it's like we are now looking at what in a few minutes ago, Siti called it the new normal. The new normal is that, you know, it's okay to work from home. The new normal is that it's okay for law students to do lectures online. The new normal, even for the Sydney Law College, is that we have now got to do exams online. 10 years ago, if you spoke to someone about doing exams online, they will ask you, are you okay? What do you mean? 10 years ago, if you're a lawyer and you're thinking of working from home all the time, they would have thought you can't be serious. But today, we accept that the way we can run things is online. And we'll talk about this in a few minutes. But let's go to look at my next slide. By the way, if you have any questions in the course of my discussion, I'd like you to stop me and we can talk. If you don't, I'll have to ask you if you have questions. So please, let's talk. But let's now look at my next issue. You know, a point I have made is that the future is perhaps already here. But I also told you at the beginning that I've always had a passion about law and legal education and what to do about the future. But I have to admit too that actually there's a challenge. The challenge is quite serious because you see, there are three aspects of this challenge. Let's look at it this way. There are three aspects of the challenge. First, we got the students at bottom. Here, we have our students. You may be in your professional year, you could be in your first year, but you are in that category of students, wherever year in which you are. Then we have our legal educators, the universities and all the groups there. We have a problem. The problem has two angles. The first problem is that as a student, when you go into the law system, as your law studies career, preparing for a future career, you have about 3 years or 4 years to finish. 5 years you are out there. Now, how do you know what's waiting for you 5 years from the time you enroll? When we have children, when we look at our own children, how do we know what the future holds? This is an amazing complexity. The reason being that when we take on law students, we promise them that we will, you know, and let me change it by saying that when I set up the law school, I used to go out there to preach. You know, I used to go to high schools. I used to go to, I talk to newspapers, I talk to everybody. And I say to myself, in fact, I remember talking to some parents who came to see me. I said, all I ask for is that you give me your son or daughter, and then I promise in 3 to 4 years' time, I'll give you a lawyer. An interesting point. I was very brave, you know. Give me your son or daughter, and I'll give you a lawyer in 3 or 4 years' time. But the question parents ask is, but would they get a job? What would the future look like? And I would say something like, I cannot say what the future looks like, but my job is to anticipate what the future would be and to train lawyers who are ready for the future. I used to use a very nice word. I want to train lawyers who are, quote, job ready. What do you mean by job ready? But my point is that it's possible to take a student today and then mold the student in a job ready, if you like, philosophy. In other words, we don't know what the future holds, but we can anticipate using current arrangements, using current arguments, using current frameworks. We can anticipate what we think the future would be like. I'll talk about this in a bit more detail later. But so as universities, legal educators, and not legal educations, but legal educators and clinical programs, we have a problem. The problem we have is that we take our students and then promise the student that come to us, do the assignments, do your homework, do the exams. After 3 to 4 years, you become a lawyer. Hopefully, you get a job. But I wanted, in my private law school, I wanted to change the word hopefully to say, I believe you will get a job. Because I was going to put you out there to say to the world that you are the new breed of lawyer. What do I mean by the new breed of lawyer? My argument, and I talk about this later, is that our new breed of lawyer is that person who is not like the traditional lawyer we know, who only sees their lives from the classroom to the courtroom. In fact, I used to tell newspapers and TV programs that I wanted a lawyer who can move from the classroom to the courtroom to the boardroom. This is the type of lawyer we were hoping to breed. Now, the third element in my strange diagram here is, of course, what I call the future employment environment. And so here we are. We got our students at the bottom. Then we got our university educators, not educations, educators and clinical programs. We are trying to mold our students at the bottom here to fit a future employment environment. As I said, we are trying to make our students job ready. But it's not just us who have that responsibility. We believe our students also have that responsibility. And so what we used to do, what I used to do for my students is to say that, now I want you to join every professional association. For instance, if I was talking to you now, I would say that you should be thinking of joining the Insolvency Practitioner Students Association or any other association that helps, because I'm training you for the future. But we will talk in detail about all that in a minute. For the moment, though, I wish to conclude this section of our discussion with a simple observation. That you see, the future poses a challenge. The future poses a challenge because as legal educators and as students, we take a leap of faith. We take a leap of faith because we don't know what the future is, but we can anticipate. And as we anticipate, we then say to ourselves, we think this is what is going to happen. And so we teach you these laws and these rules. We equip you with a technique of legal reasoning so you can deal with every other situation later. I'll talk in detail about this in a minute. But are there any questions so far, or should I keep going? I'm happy to keep going, but I'm happier if you have a question. If there's no question, I'll go to my next slide. Now, so far I've been talking about the challenge, the future, and the challenge of the future. So, if, as I say, that legal educators have a problem, students have a problem in terms of how to anticipate the future, how do we even make our students job ready for the future? How do we create lawyers of the future? There are issues in there. Now, first of all, we know this anyway. Already we're talking about the migration to online delivery, offering flexibility and efficiency. You know, one of the things, and I didn't say this earlier in my discussions with Siti yesterday, but one of the things I'm doing now is that in another job I do, I have an application to establish a higher education institute with the government now. One big issue which comes up is, how are you equipped for online delivery? Because this is the future. So, okay, we know Zoom, we know Teams, we know everything, we know Ding Talk. Just talk about it. Everyone has some kind of online delivery platform. So this is the new trend. Some people will say that, well, it's not really a new trend because you see, how can it be a new trend? Because after all, so many universities have had distant education in the past. Well, the distant education in the past is so distant in the past that we don't want to bother with it, because online delivery is not distance education anymore. What we're doing now is not distance education. It's actually face-to-face on the computer. It's a different ballgame. Online education is different from distance education, because in distance education, they usually send you some bunch of work in the mail. You read it every now and again, you've got time, and then you don't get to talk to anyone seriously. But this online delivery is a different ballgame, because with advances in technology, we are able to do 10 o'clock in Sydney, 8 o'clock in Malaysia. With online delivery, we are able to see faces, put names to the faces, and actually, display slides in and out as we want, as if we were sitting in the same room. But much more excitingly, with online delivery, we have flexibility. You can record this as we are recording and play it back later. In fact, some of you may well be drinking a cup of tea as we talk. Things have changed. So this is a new trend in legal education. It's not just a trend in legal education, it's a trend in education. We are asking everybody, please rethink the way you teach. Rethink the classroom. When I was setting up my law school before, I used to say, people will come to us and say, but your building is so small. I said, that's because you're thinking in the past. But the universities are big, universities have big buildings. I know, very nice. And we have a nice statue and a nice lawn area. It's good because students get together, they exchange ideas in that environment. They have a spirit of, what in English you'd call the cord, spirit core, in that we all bring them together and so on. But that's, of course, the past and how we were all brought up to see education in the university. We now know from what we're doing that actually it's possible to bring people together. In fact, when we started this lecture, your professor says, hey, come on, everybody, come online, say hello to Prof. Come on, this is different. This is not just distant education. It's actually very close education. It's a different ballgame. So migration to online delivery offering flexibility and efficiency, it's now a norm. Maybe later in the post-corona environment, we're all going to go back and say, hey, yeah, the university is a nice place. Maybe we go for the occasional meeting so we can have coffee. But please, we can do this meeting, we can do online. And you know what's funny about this online business? People are happy to do WhatsApp using video and chatting when they could be in Penang, you could be in KL, you can do all the talk. Or I could be in Sydney, you could be in Penang, we could chat. But when it comes to education, people say, oh no, that's not a good idea. Hello, why? This and the current development shows it is a good idea. It works. Now, there are, of course, e-learning facilities. I'll tell you a funny story. When I applied to establish Australia's first private law school, the first question everybody raised was, what about a library? Have you got a library? I said, okay, yeah, of course I have a library. I'll show my phone. Then they look at me, are you serious? I said, this is a library. Guys, this is a library because I can go to the US Supreme Court library anymore. I can go to the Congress, I can go to the Malaysian Supreme Court library on this phone. I can go anywhere. You're talking to me about a library building? Forget it. Then I'll tell a funny joke. There used to be a collection called Encyclopedia Britannica. I'm sure you know about Encyclopedia Britannica. When I was a young lecturer, I loved it because it's beautiful. You have nice books, Encyclopedia, the whole set. There's only one problem. Encyclopedia Britannica is published every year. And then once you publish 2000, Encyclopedia Britannica, the 2018 one becomes useless. It doesn't make sense. So I would go to this meeting with all the judges. They say, have you got a library, Professor Blake? I said, my library is here. My library is on a computer. My library is in my bedroom. My library is anywhere. E-learning is here with us. We are in the future, folks. And when you talk to them, they say, okay, we are. And my argument to people at the time was that the library as a huge building, it's nice. Yeah, it's very nice, actually. You can go there and everybody's quiet. Hey, don't talk. Yeah, we know that. But actually, we know that the better library is in your bedroom. You can sit in bed early in the morning and check the news and check the law report. So I said, e-learning facilities is here with us. That's the trend. That's where we're going. The e-library. Now, I explained to people that, I don't have, they said, what about your journals? I said, journals? Oh, actually, I have a library of about 300 journals, except they're not stored in a room because actually no library has enough room to stock 300 titles. And I was right. I was right because now many libraries in Australia are getting rid of their books. They even pay for you to take them. Hey, take these books, please. Take them wherever you like. So the future is here with us with e-learning facilities, e-library facilities. Then, of course, you all know about the learning management systems, LMS, as some schools call it. There are different learning management systems. You can use Blackboard, you can use Canvas, you can use different, but this future happened yesterday, actually. The future happened yesterday because now we make extensive use of learning management systems. We put everything on board. Students can come and chat. The only thing students cannot do is have coffee online. But maybe the future is already working on that. We'll see what we can do. But right now, it's interesting. But the one which excites me most are the apps. There's an app for everything. So there's a funny saying in English, there's an app for that. Everything you say, oh, there's an app for that. So when it comes to learning, when it comes to teaching, hey, there's an app for that. I bet some of you are actually looking at your mobile phones because you're using the Zoom app. And I said, there's an app for that. So it doesn't matter what it is. The only thing I suppose there's no app for is the exam. There's no app for an exam. It would be good if there was one. There's no app for assignments. We should work on that. Then we can all have an app for everything. But as I said, there are trends in legal education now in Australia, and I believe in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in fact, in the whole of ASEAN, there are interesting trends. There are, of course, difficulties. In fact, you in Malaysia are lucky. You're lucky because Malaysia is an advanced country as compared to some of the ASEAN countries. So here we are, we have e-learning systems, we have e-learning library facilities. All these, of course, depend on the stability of our internet resources and so on. But some countries can afford it. It's a different topic. But when countries can afford it, the future is already here. So when we talk about current, I call this slide trends in legal education in the current future. The idea of talking about the current future, it's funny. It reminds me of a book, a very famous book called Homo Deus, where someone talks about a brief history of tomorrow. How can you talk about a history of tomorrow? It's a bit strange. But in a way, that's what this issue is about. Now, let me just talk to you about my next slide. Is there any question so far on what I've been saying so far?
Class, you can ask question anytime.
You can ask questions anytime.
Okay.
And that's
They
an
don't have
invitation.
the question yet, Prof. Maybe you can proceed.
That's fine. There's no question. So I can just continue anyway. And we can, I know I just have about an hour. So after that, we can all have a bit of a chat too. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk about is, so I talk about the future is here with us and so on. So let's just stop for a moment and ask a question. So what do lawyers do? And how is this to be affected by the future? Ask yourself, as someone in the professional year, hoping to do your pupillage sooner or later in the next few months, what is it that the community thinks you can do? Or better still, what is it that you think as a lawyer you've been trained to do? This to me is an important issue. I'm very passionate about this question. The reason being that when I was preaching to people to come and do law with my school, I had to ask myself, what is it that I think I can tell my students to do? Or what is it that I think I can tell my students that they can do? Now, I begin with the top, this bit here. I begin with the top about, this thing about, of course, this is what all lawyers know, that you become a solicitor, embarrassed. Yeah, we know that. But that is a normal. To me, it's like saying, I'm going to build a house with a window. Yeah, we know every house has a window. So it was a big deal. But I always say to students then that My interest in law is training a lawyer who thinks out of a square, train a lawyer who doesn't think that the traditional way is the only way. And I used to say that we are going to be innovative. So innovation became my buzzword. So yes, of course, our lawyer, as you are in your final year now going for your pupillage, and then hopefully you work later, you'll be thinking about how you be a solicitor. But please, we can go clockwise or anti-clockwise on this diagram. We can go this way and then this way, so that's better. Now, what I'm trying to say then is that, remember, lawyers are, in fact, let me put it this way. Law is actually a broad discipline which allows the trained lawyer to be able to do a number of things, of course, including what happens in courtrooms. I begin by saying our lawyer can't be a boardroom person. But what do you mean by a boardroom person? For company secretaries, board of directors meetings and so on, there are usually issues about law where a person who is well trained in law provides the best advice. And so some of the best company secretaries, as a matter of fact, have legal background. So my invitation to you is that please think out of the square. In legal education, what you learn in law, in contract, in torts, in crime, and everything else prepares you to do jobs, not just in the courtroom, but also in the boardroom. And of course, I go to my next point here. As people who are fortunate enough to be doing a class in insolvency, it's an interesting subject. An interesting subject because remember, liquidators and insolvency practitioners actually work closely with lawyers. Some lawyers also act as liquidators and insolvency practitioners, but normally a lot of IP or insolvency practitioners tend to be accountants with background, but they need a lawyer. So think about how useful this could be. And I'll later talk about it in some detail because, well, I hate to say it, it's not a very nice thing to say, but when business goes bad, business goes good for liquidation lawyers. It's not very nice to say, but it's true. Because the whole idea of being a liquidation lawyer is that you help people who are in distress. So liquidation and insolvency practitioners are people, these are people we could work with. But what about government services, provincial services? Remember, government services require lawyers. So as a lawyer, your focus isn't just what happens in the courtroom. Your focus is any area which requires proper advice, because everything we do in society is regulated by law. And so your idea about regulation helps. So government services will be useful. Then of course, my favorite, in-house counsel. In-house counsels will be those who are working for big corporations and small corporations as legal advisors in-house. I've always talked to my students and said, this is perhaps one of the best jobs because you can sometimes do 9 to 5. In normal law solicitors work, you don't usually get to do a lot of 9 to 5s. So you can be an in-house counsel, and then of course you can be a compliance specialist. To me, one of the mistakes we make in law schools is that we don't usually talk enough about compliance. Compliance is so critical because quite frankly, any company, any major organization, any entity that has to live within the law requires some degree of compliance. In fact, you can begin with your own university. I believe and I suspect strongly that the registrar has a legal background. It's an interesting point because you need compliance. So lawyers are good in compliance, and that's something we can all think about. And so when I talk about legal education and for the future lawyer, I say the sky is so high for the future lawyer in terms of what they can achieve. They can just reach for it. Of course, we would not be able to finish our discussion without talking about banking and finance and the role of a lawyer in this area. Any major financial organization, any major banking organization requires lawyers. Then academic and education services. Some of you may not have thought about it, but an interesting subject area is, of course, lawyers going into academia in different forms. So this is my lawyer. My lawyer in a current form. My lawyer as I see them. When I go preaching about how, I mean, students would usually ask me, so Professor Blake, what do you think? I mean, would I get a job when I finish? And I will say something like, I can't guarantee your job. No one can guarantee anything. But there's one thing we can guarantee, that not all lawyers work in courtrooms. In fact, in Australia, and I believe also in Malaysia, in Australia particularly, about 70% of people who are trained in law schools don't work in the courts as such. This was a major issue. When I was setting up my law school, people always ask me that, how do you know they're going to get jobs? Because there's too many lawyers already. And I said, the funny thing about saying too many lawyers already is that people who say so are not themselves lawyers. Usually, people who are saying there are too many lawyers are journalists. And in one journalist's case, I found out that she tried to get into law school and didn't get in. She became a journalist. And I said, hey, was it because you couldn't get to law school that you always think lawyers don't get jobs? Anyway, the point I was making was that people think lawyers don't get jobs because they look at only the big law firms and how they hire. But remember, most students doing law don't really end up in courtrooms. Yes, some students do litigation and transactional work in law firms, but a lot of students are working for companies as advisors. They're working for the government as advisors. They're working for banking and finance institutions. So please, the point I make is that a lawyer is someone with legal knowledge. A lawyer is not necessarily someone who only works in a courtroom. Someone with legal knowledge who can actually apply the law to help society. But don't let me talk too much about this because, as I said, I'm very passionate about this topic. Let me look at something else which would be of more interest to us apart from this topic. Now, let me just do it this way. I can't advance it. What's wrong with me? Okay, so, oh no, sorry, I've gone too far. Let me go back. So, the lawyer of the future. If my lawyer is what I was talking about, then, so what's my lawyer of the future? What's he going to look like? What does she looks like, my lawyer of the future? Let me begin it this way. I could ask you, what do you, in fact, see if you can answer this. What determines what lawyers do? To answer the question, I ask you to think two things. My view is that lawyers and the job they do, or the jobs lawyers do, is determined by two important factors. So what are these two important factors which determines what lawyers do? Factor number one, what clients want. So what lawyers do is obviously based on what the client wants. You do not do anything you want because you are a service provider. So as a service provider, your job is to provide what your client needs. But there's a second factor. What your client needs is actually determined by what the law is on the subject. So if your client needs a house, if your client needs an agreement on a company, if your client needs to buy shares, if your client needs to liquidate a company, if your client is thinking that they are about to go bankrupt, they can't actually deliver to shareholders and so on, then of course, that in itself is determined by two things: what the client wants to do and what the law allows them to do. So what you, the lawyer, would do in terms of the services you offer is of course determined by these two factors. Okay, so my point is that these are the two factors which determine what a lawyer does. So how does this affect the future? how does this shape our future lawyer? There is a problem, and I want you to see my point about this. Now, we have an issue. I've been talking a lot about what shapes the future, what shapes what our lawyer wishes to do. But there is a problem though, because what do we know what will happen 10 years from now, 5 years from now? In fact, if you want to be brave, 2050, or don't let us go too far, 2030. How do we know what's going to happen in 2030 so our lawyers today will be ready for 2030? So what would the law be like on the specific issues in the future? There's another issue. What do we know what clients would want in the future? So we do things for them. What do we know? So there are so many whats. What would the law be on a specific issue in future? What would clients want in future? The truth is, we don't know. It's a crystal ball issue. You do not know exactly what they would want, but we can use current trends to then work out what we think it's possible. So let's look at some issues. Now, what I can say is that we can already smell the future. We can smell it. But what do I mean by we can smell the future? Look at Bitcoin. We already know about the rise of Bitcoin. This future is already smelling in our ears. We can talk about, of course, about blockchain. Also, the future is here in some respect. We can talk about some other issues. For instance, fintech, that's financial technology, and how that's going to impact on what we do. We can talk about RegTech, and then, of course, artificial intelligence. Now, so this is the future as we see it, but it's not all. So far, we talk about the future. I said we can smell the future: RegTech, artificial intelligence, blockchain, fintech, and of course, Bitcoin. These are shaping, giving us ideas about what we want in the future, what we think can happen in the future. But I would even go further. If things like Uber, if things like Airbnb, if things like Gojek and so on can actually tell us what's happening now, we can say that the future is actually going to be full of disruptions. What I mean by disruption is that some events which occur to disturb the existing arrangements, like Uber comes to, if you like, change taxis and how they behave. Now, or Bitcoin comes to look at how we invest. But that's not all. We can then, on top of all this, talk about the environment also. Environmental issues are going to impact on what we do. Let me tell you an interesting story about this and my idea of the future. Occasionally, when I was supervising students, a student will come and say, Professor Blair, I want to write a thesis on the environment. I say, that's good. And I would say, what would you like to talk about? Usually the sexy topic to talk about is biodiversity. It's very nice, actually, biodiversity. Everyone talks about biodiversity. It's a good topic. But then, of course, my view to the student was that it's a good topic now, but remember, we've been talking biodiversity since the Rio Convention. So it's been with us for a long time. Now, unless you're going to tell me something really amazingly different about biodiversity, it's a great topic, but please be careful. So students will say, so what should I do? I said, why don't we think of the future? Let's think 10 years from now, what's going to happen? Then, of course, everybody gets worried. I said to one student, why don't we talk about carbon credits? Then they say, what are carbon credits? I said, that's a good idea. Go and research carbon credits. Let's talk about what is likely to happen to the forest in Borneo. What's going to happen to the forest in Amazon? How are developing countries going to cope with carbon credits and be able to sell credits in future? Because biodiversity now is here with us to stay. Now let's move one step ahead. So we talk about environment. This is the smell of the future. The environment as we know it now is going to put a lot of stress on us. As we're talking today, let's take the case of Malaysia. We can talk about Australia also. But let's take the case of Malaysia. Malaysia now is amazing. an amazing country because, you know, they talk about Malaysia 2020, 2050, 2030 and so on, and the new amazing projects being built. But there's something interesting. Now there's a big talk about major buildings having to be ecologically sound with plants growing on buildings. It's like bringing the jungle into the city. But this is only the smell of the future. So when we talk about our lawyers of the future, I'm saying we as lawyers can already smell the future, from Bitcoin to blockchain to robotics to artificial intelligence, and of course, the actual physical environment. There are things we need to do. But that's not all. So we need to ask the question also. We can talk a lot about the future, but ask one simple question. But Professor Blade, how do we know what people would want in the future? I wish I can say it for certain what people want in the future. But a lot of research now, based on questions asked of major law firms, is already giving us an indication of what businesses expect. This is an interesting point from a number of law recruitment agencies. They say clients would want a business advisor who brings a legal lens to issues and who is at ease with technology and working alongside with in-house teams. Lawyers, and this is the important part, lawyers need to be developing business acumen and an awareness of a commercial context of clients' issues. More important, lawyers, the clients want more than just an interpretation of legislation or a contract drafted. You know what? This is so critical. Clients want more than just the interpretation of a legislation or the drafting of a contract. Clients want more. They want a person who understands the business environment. They want somebody who understands regtex. They want somebody who understands financial technology. They want somebody who understands a bit about robotics, a bit about artificial intelligence. They want someone who is business savvy. And in the current environment, it's well placed to be able to offer advice in a series of things. This is a challenge for law schools, it's a challenge for lawyers, and it's a challenge for all of us. I say it's a challenge for law schools because as legal educators, what we normally do is to look at interpretation of legislation and contracts and then bring students up to look at precedent and interpret them beautifully, which is important. But one of the things we're saying is that, above all, we need to have students who are, all-rounded. One of the arguments, which is now put up, and I invite you to think about this carefully, is that in our current technology arrangements, if you do cyber law, you are seen as doing a specialist subject. And we are saying maybe by the time your children go to law school, and starting perhaps even with you, something like cyber law or computer-related law need not be a specialist subject because it's a cross-cutting subject. It's supposed to be related to almost everything we do. So in a way, this is the future. Now we talk about artificial intelligence as the new in thing for the future. But maybe what we are talking about is that our lawyers need to be developing an interesting sense of what the future looks like. Now, if I was a student, I would say, Professor Blade, what you're asking for is that you want a lawyer to be everything to everyone. And I would say, yes, that's the idea. You should be everything to everyone. In fact, think about it. Maybe that's what judges do. If you take a case to the court, the case could be on family matters sometimes. It could be sometimes on criminal law. In some countries, by the time the case goes on appeal to the Supreme Court, of course, the judges sitting there become almost lawyers for everything. They judge and decide cases on any issues affecting our daily lives. Maybe our lawyer of the future would need to be like that. In other words, they must have a good sense of the business working environment and a good sense of what to do. But what to do in specific business environments. This brings me to my next slide. So I thought that if I was a student, I would ask, so Professor Bliss, what's happening in Australia? I mean, what's going on? This is a time of a COVID, times are stressful. Malaysia is not an exception. So what is it? And so here, give me a few minutes to talk about what I call a postcard from Australia. It's interesting. Obviously, the COVID has triggered temporary freezing highs. But what's interesting, why I bring up the COVID issue, is that what we are saying in Australia is that the COVID environment has brought the future faster than we expected. It has brought the future faster because now, even though law firms have frozen, some law firms, I should say, have frozen hiring, they are still hiring in insolvency and restructuring and litigation, because somehow the COVID environment actually is breeding business in another area, insolvency and restructuring. As I said to you before, unfortunately, bad news is good news for insolvency practice. We'll talk about this in a minute. Now, law firms are embracing working from home as a norm. So legal educators are accepting that you can actually train from home using online resources. And in fact, our teaching somehow is even getting better online. But then law firms as employers are also now accepting that maybe working from home is not a bad idea. In fact, some are even saying that they are seeing higher productivity from lawyers working from home. And there's a reason for this, because when you work from home, you see, it's not 9 to 5. The working hours somehow are flexible, but you do more. Because you can watch a bit of TV or make coffee, but you come and do more. And of course, there's a general acceptance today in the Australian environment that 9 to 5 working hours is a thing of the past. We don't need it. So some law firms are even saying that in the post-corona environment, maybe working from home will be better. In fact, I don't know whether you are aware of this, but in a place like Sydney, the corona situation has been eased down considerably. In fact, you know, when you go out now, most people don't wear masks. It's almost normal. But somehow, offices are still working from home. Very interesting. Because some are saying that it's very efficient. You don't have to sit in a taxi or car every day to come to work. You can work from home. And if you need to have a meeting, you can do it on Zoom. What also fascinates me is that big law firms have announced that they are not cutting recruitment. Some law firms are cutting recruitment, as I said, but the bigger law firms are not cutting recruitment. They are saying that in the COVID environment, they are going to maintain their workforce. They may not perhaps hire too many new ones, but they are certainly going to still keep recruiting. In fact, some law firms are joking that this is the best time to recruit because you can actually look carefully in your selection arrangements. Baker & McKenzie, one of the big firms, of course, in the world, says that it has not frozen hiring entirely, but it's adopting a much more prudent approach and scrutinizing hiring needs more carefully. Let's conclude with this on this slide with a simple point that in our current environment, if you're looking at what is happening elsewhere, like Australia or the UK or indeed the US, it's interesting. In the US, law firms are still hiring. In fact, they say that they already hired in the fall, so they don't see any more issues anyway. In the UK, business is almost like normal, and so law firms have not really laid off people as such. But in Australia, as I said, big law firms are still hiring in any case. Now, I do not know the situation in Malaysia, but the interesting point to make is that if I was a student, I would be actually trying to sell myself in the best way I can using my best tools. Because as an insolvency student, not an insolvent student, insolvency student, you can actually market yourself as someone whose role in a firm would add value. Which brings me to my next slide. So, as I said, we should talk about insolvency practitioners in a changing world. it's an important issue for me because this class is, of course, an insolvency class, and I think it's useful to know. And I've made this point already to you, and you may want to talk about it later also. The point I made to you is that, you see, in times of economic stress, business for the IP industry is actually good. And it's unfortunate to put it this way, but what I'm saying is that in terms of economic stress, of course, that's when businesses think of going bankrupt. That's when businesses become insolvent. That's when businesses have debts issues and creditors have problems and so on. And so, unfortunately, that's when business becomes bigger for insolvency practice. So I say bad business is good business for IP. Now, this may not be very good news for businesses, but we need to talk about it. And so I say, for instance, in this slide, that in our post-COVID economic environment, where businesses will come under stress, we then take a good look at, of course, the changing role, the changing attitudes of IP. I notice there are two there's in my slide here, which is unfortunate, so you should take it out. There's a mistake there with two there. Anyway, the role of the IP lawyers or IP practitioners in the changing world is actually quite important, because here we can talk about people advising within the law about insolvent trading, about voidable contracts. Lawyers can talk about creditors' trust. They can talk about standstill agreements, and these are actually fairly important issues for lawyers in IP in insolvency practice. You know, you can actually go to talk to firms about what you can assist with work out arrangements. If I was a student today, what I would be wanting to do with my insolvency lectures and notes is to go and dig them up and look for things which make me stand out. Because, as I've said before, you don't want to go marketing yourself as somebody who is good at contract law. We want to market ourselves as people who have something to sell, something which this COVID environment actually makes us useful for. And I'm saying that, in fact, you in this class, more than perhaps other classes, are better placed because of your background in insolvency. So what I would suggest is that if you didn't take insolvency seriously before, this is a good time. It's a good time because it's a bad time. It's a bad time for business, but a good time to be able to market yourself as an insolvency practitioner or insolvency lawyer who is able to help insolvency practitioners. Now, students usually come and seek advice about employment prospects. And I always tell them, you know, there are so many companies out there looking for so many students in a sea of students. How do you make yourself stand out? You make yourself stand out by offering something that actually is needed, particularly in the current environment. So really what we sell, what we offer our prospective employers depends very much on what the current economic and social conditions are. My argument is that for students, particularly doing insolvency, well, this is a good time. It's a good time because when you write your CVs, please, the idea is to highlight something important. When you go to do your pupillage, really you should be looking to see if you could work with a firm that wants to use you to polish up their own insolvency and bankruptcy practice. So if I was to look for pupillage now in my professional year, we don't know how long the corona is going to go for. We don't know how long it could be in the year. Some are saying 2022, 2021 ended. Whatever it is, you got the next 9 months to make yourself look good because this is a bad economic environment. So, for instance, to what extent can you assist with personal bankruptcy and other arrangements? So let me just, I've talked a lot. Let me just try and bring what I've said to a conclusion. What I like to say is that whether as a receiver, liquidator, or trustee, depend on the entity in distress, our insolvency practitioner, either as a lawyer or an accountant, and of course, I'm interested in only lawyers now, our insolvency practitioner or insolvency assistant needs to be an expert with some knowledge in fintech and regtech. Some students ask, what is regtech? Regtech is, of course, the regulation of technology. This is the law. These are the laws relating to how we regulate the use of technology. Students ask, what is fintech? Fintech is, of course, the laws regulating financial technology. So if you were going to be out there in the market today as a lawyer for the future, the question is, how would you market yourself? Think carefully. As you write your CV, should you be emphasizing something you did in, let's say, the environment, which is important? Should you also add that to your knowledge of insolvency and how you've mastered the 2016 insolvency legislation and how the new arrangements are made about appointment of receivers and liquidators? All I'm saying here is that as students, we have a duty to also market ourselves. Each of you in your professional year has a duty to market yourselves using the tools you've been provided already. If I was a student in my professional year looking forward to do my pupillage with any good firm, of course, there are a number of things I would do. I'll look for those firms which have shown an interest or expertise in bankruptcy and in insolvency. And it doesn't have to be a big firm necessarily. You don't always have to go for the biggest firm. Look for even a medium-sized firm. In fact, even small firms, and in your talking to them about what you can offer as a lawyer of the future, explain that you can offer good services related to, for instance, insolvency, either for companies or even personal insolvency. Because the reality of our current corona and post-corona environment is that companies and ordinary households are facing the stress. They need services of good legal advice and accountants. You can help in this area. So I also say that our future lawyers would have to be savvy with e-legal procedures, including e-filing systems. Quite frankly, if you're leaving law school today as a professional year student and hoping to do your pupillage somewhere, knowledge about e-filing systems in the courts in Malaysia is important, because the courts in Malaysia have moved a lot towards a paperless court. And that's something you need to demonstrate your knowledge of this area and how that ties in with your knowledge in insolvency, for instance. And of course, if you are going to talk to a particular law firm interested in a particular industry, please make sure that you know a bit about the emerging technology in that industry. So let me just conclude all my discussions here. As I said before we started, I'm passionate about legal education, but my passion there isn't about the usual bits and pieces about contract drafts and so on, which is important, by the way, because as people in your final year, by now you must have a hands-on approach in terms of knowing how to draft contracts, and you don't always have to have face-to-face to be able to do so. You can still learn that online with your lecturers. But what I'm saying to you, as people in the professional year, in a liquidation, in an insolvency class, is that, this is perhaps your year. It's perhaps your year because we are actually looking at a situation where good, credible, medium-sized law firms and big law firms and even smaller law firms are looking for people who can advise on issues of liquidation, bankruptcy, receiverships, and so on. And you are perhaps better equipped than most other law students are. I think I've spoken enough, and I would like to conclude by saying that when we talk about our lawyer of the future and the future laws as such, we should ask, are we not already in the future? How do we prepare for the future? Should we have started preparing for the future yesterday? Maybe all I'm trying to say is that I can end the way I started by saying that there's a joke about lawyers, but the most important joke is never told. The lawyer lives 3 lives simultaneously. The lawyer lives in the present, the past, and the future. The future is perhaps already here, and we should know how to control it. Thank you so much. This concludes my chat.
Thank you so much, Prof. That was so interesting. It gives the idea, and also what I can say is it's clearer now what the lawyers can do in the futures, and then what are the role of lawyer, not only to go to the court, but there are so many things. From your chat just now, can see that so many options for the student actually for them to do. And I really hope the student have so many questions to ask to you. Students?
Or maybe they have no questions at all because it's too early in the morning. And
No,
everybody said,
I have a
you can have
question.
tea. Oh, you have a question? Okay.
There's one question in the chat group from Nadia. She said that I do agree with your point, Prof. Our options are quite wide in choosing our career paths. My question is, as a person with legal education, I'm quite interested in education, not as a teacher or lecturer, but as someone that can help making the education field more enhanced. How can I contribute to this field as a lawyer apart from being a lecturer or a teacher? Good question from Nadia.
Nadia, that's a fascinating question. In fact,
yes, very good question. I never thought of that before.
Because what's interesting about Nadia's question is that he says, I don't necessarily want to be a lecturer, but I still want to contribute to legal education in some way.
That's very good.
There are 3 ways you can contribute to legal education. One of them is that even when you work in a law firm, big or small, you can contribute to legal education by helping young people coming on board your firm. You can contribute to legal education by, in a way, joining or encouraging students to join the law society. In fact, there are students' law societies or young students, young lawyer societies, where you can actually offer advice. But there's another way, and it's never too late to start. And that's where I say to students that one of the things you can always do is, in fact, even develop your own personal blog, a blog about what your own experience is in your study of law. You'd be surprised how many people actually read your experience, because you are already someone with an experience, having gone through your law studies. I bet every young law person studying law would like to know what your perceptions are in terms of what you studied. What should they get right? There's something you can do. You don't have to be a professor to do this. But when you start your own practice or you join a practice, whenever you can, please volunteer to go and talk to young law students if you can. And in fact, I usually ask students to do this a lot. You're already in law school here in your university. Think about this possibility. Do you think in the next year or 2 or 3, you would want to come back just one afternoon to give a nice, simple talk about what you expect in a practice, what not to do? And in the process, it will be interesting. You'll be contributing to legal education in a different way. But I notice your point that you don't want to be a teacher or a professor. But in a way, I wonder, because yes, you don't have to be a professor, but as I said, we all teach in different ways. And my point about teaching in different ways is that when I started up the law school here, one of the things I did was to look for young lawyers, my young lawyers in town, to come and talk to my new students in there. And there's nothing more exciting than having a 20 to 30-year-old or 35-year-old nice lawyer who graduated only a few years ago coming to talk to students about their first day in court and what to do and what not to do. There's nothing more fascinating than coming to tell us about the mistakes they've made and how and what to study. So, Nadia, you can actually contribute in many ways to legal education. And please, if you can, once you are out of school now, look back and offer, and I'm sure some of your lecturers now at your university will be happy, offer to come back every now and again to chat. And in fact, lecturers love this when their students come back and have a nice chat to students. And you'll be surprised. They usually will give you a cup of tea. The students will talk to you after the lecture. You tell them your first day. It's nice. But remember, the idea is always being able to somehow make someone aware of your experience. Nothing beats experience. So if you want to contribute to education, not necessarily as a lecturer or professor, there are different ways. And by the way, I said something about a blog. I know a lot of students don't take it seriously. But look at it this way. If you have Facebook, you do so many postings. What about if you made those postings into your own personal blog on your exciting times in the law? You'd be surprised how many students actually read it, because it's okay. Some of you already are members of a law society in your school. Please come back, contribute to their blog. It's important, and students love it. So it's a great question, and I'm pleased because I used my students to come back. In fact, I've been teaching law in Sydney for 25 years. Before that, I was teaching in Tasmania for another 10 years. So I've been a lawyer, so I know so many law students who are now practitioners. And so I usually bring them back. In fact, when I did my law school, if you go back there now, almost every teacher there, 60% of the teachers were my former students anyway. They are my former students who will come back. And so I use them. And usually, I'll tell you a funny story. Sometimes I need someone to teach. One of my most exciting stories was, I needed someone to teach family law because the person who was going to teach family law said they couldn't do it, they stopped. And I had 2 days to find a family law lecturer. And so I called one of my former students. I said, hey, let's meet for lunch. So we meet for lunch. I say, hey, listen now, this is your lucky day. He said, why? I said, because I want you to teach family law for me. He said, oh, yeah. When? I said, maybe the day after tomorrow. He said, what? I said, yeah, do it for me the day after tomorrow. But what's interesting is that he was a family law practitioner and I knew him. And so I said, come do it for me. The person who teaches civil procedure now in the school, which I don't teach there anymore, but I left, is someone who was my former student before. And so I needed someone to do something. She was in practice actually. And I said, Sarah, I need someone to teach civil procedure. You think you can do everything. Come and do it for me. So she said, yeah, I know someone who teaches, in fact, Australia's best lawyer in sports law was my student before. She's such a great lawyer. And so I needed someone to teach sports law. I said, can I bring my students to your law firm? They can sit in your office and you can talk to them. So in a way, make yourself accessible. Nadia, you can do it. And I think it would be very nice. Sorry, it was a nice question, so I talked a lot. But please, another question.
Thank you, Prof, for the question, for the answers. That's very great. Another question from Ain Afika. As a law student, how do we take advantage of this future education trend?
The future education, how do you take advantage of it? Is that what you said?
How do we take, as a law student, how do we take advantage of this future education trend?
Now, my best response to you on this one is what perhaps I've already said to students before in the past. Remember, as a law student, you are actually looking for to the future. The past is already gone. We are here now. We are in the present. You look to what's going to happen to the future. So I would say two things. One is that we want you to log onto or to lock onto those niche areas. And I've made a lot of points about insolvency. Of course, some of you may not be interested in insolvency, but if that's the case, look for another area. A future education trend is to look for those areas that are likely to grow. In fact, you know what? Some of you already even know this, because if you're an investor, if you're going to invest your time and money, you look for an area of growth. If you're going to buy a house, you buy a house in an area that's likely to develop more in future. The same thing when you come to law, legal education, and preparing for the future, what do? My students usually have a problem, and they're like students anywhere else. Your average student will say, but you know what, I don't really like the environment. I want to do something in human rights. And I say, I know, human rights is good. In fact, I'm a human rights lawyer, so I know human rights is good. But how do we make it pay? How do we make it prepare you so that you do what you like and get employed and get better paid for it? So we then try and bring it together. So my suggestion to you is that what you can do is to make yourself look specialized. I know it seems early, but if you start early, it's better. Make yourself specialized. Please choose an area you are passionate about and let's work on making that area pay. So I would say, if I was you, I would want to be an expert in financial technology law. I would like to be an expert in regulation technology law. I'd like to be an expert in robotics law. I would like to be an expert in AI law, artificial intelligence law. As we talk now, ask yourself the question, what is the law in Malaysia on drones? Not many people know.
Yes, not many people.
Hey, why don't you start? Be the expert on drones. What I'm saying that there are so many interesting things out there. In fact, we've had big arguments in my class. I teach torts. And we have big arguments in class about whether someone stalking you, someone cyber stalking is a tort or not. And I'm saying the truth of the matter is that not many lawyers in Australia actually specialize in this new area because lawyers are very traditional, because we are like the proverbial tortoise which crawls very slowly. And technology is like a deer which runs so fast. And so we are always chasing after it. So my suggestion to you is, please, this is a competitive environment. One way to stand out is to look for that area where there's potential for growth. I would say look for technology-related issues in financial technology or regulatory technology. But 3 years ago, my biggest push for students was compliance. Students always ask, what's compliance? And I get excited when they ask me, what's compliance? Because it means that we are in business. Now, compliance is where, you see, for instance, if you take a company, if you take any entity in the community, take your university, there are so many rules about the university and what the university can do and cannot do. So the university usually hires a compliance person, but law schools don't teach compliance. And so one way you can make yourself stand out is to be compliance-related lawyer, where you say, I'm a compliance expert in this field. So it could be financial technology compliance, it could be regulatory technology compliance, but your job is to be compliance-related expert. So just to answer your question then, I would say, look for that niche area. I will go for compliance, I will go for fintech or regulatory technology law, but whatever happens, I am interested in those areas where there's a big need. I would, at the risk of overstressing my point, I would actually go for insolvency because there's a need out there for them. So think carefully about the future, think insolvency, think compliance, and see how we go. I hope this answers your question.
We have, thank you, Prof, for the answer. And then there's another question, good questions. Hold on. A question from Nurul Atika. For example, if you love legal study, but you don't want to become a lawyer, how do we want to cope with the society stigma that, oh, when you are a law student, you must become a lawyer or a judge?
This is such a good question, because you know what? I had the same problem when I was at the law school. You know, parents will come, say, you know, and some law students come with their parents. The parents will come and they'll talk. They say, so, you say they don't have to practice law in a courtroom. How can you be a lawyer and not go to court? And I said, oh, it's not a stigma, but it's a stigma. It's a stigma because everybody thinks if you're a lawyer, you should be a judge, you should be a court person, you should be a lawyer. But what they forget is that actually, in the society that we live in, for instance, the reason why you, Nuru, you're a lawyer is because someone taught you law, even though the person isn't in a courtroom. So obviously, legal education or law, the law professor who is a lawyer need not actually be in the courtroom. But they forget that. Then, of course, there's a bigger issue. If you say to your parent or the social people, I want to be a company secretary, they say, what? You want to be a secretary? Of all the jobs in the world, we took you to the university, you want to be a secretary? Actually, they don't understand. A company secretary is perhaps one of the most important persons in a big company. I mean, let's take the biggest company you know. In Malaysia, let's say, Petronas company, the oil company. Let's take, the Petronas company, or any big company for that matter. Do you know the most important person in the company is the company secretary? There is, of course, the company chairman, the company CEO, and the company secretary. That person who has that idea of what the company should do. So in terms of how to get rid of the stigma, yes, it's a social issue. In fact, maybe we as lawyers, we as law students, we as law professors have not done enough to actually let the society understand that the courtroom is not the only room. There are so many rooms. There's a boardroom, there's a classroom. There are too many rooms out there for lawyers. What society doesn't understand is that in actual fact, about 60% of law students, law graduates, do not practice law in the courts. In fact, the courts are too small anyway. If they had every student, they won't fit there. So think about it. Most lawyers don't actually end up there. So your question is, so how do we get rid of the stigma? Maybe for those who are going to write blogs, for those who are going to help legal education, this is a point we need to make. In fact, I can even send Siti later my own statistics because I had to do this job. I had to do this work to convince people that, listen, please come and study law. You don't have to be in a court. And so I have so many statistics about this because I had to talk to the media about how many lawyers are trained in Australia and how many end up not working in a court. So it's a stigma, but do not think it's a stigma. It's a stigma because society thinks so. But in actual fact, as I said before, your law professor isn't in a courtroom and nobody thinks it's a stigma. In fact, they think it's a great job. So think about it. If you are advising one of the biggest banks in Malaysia, well, you are a legal advisor for a bank. If anybody thinks it's a stigma, welcome, because you get paid a lot of money to go home. In actual fact, think about it. Think about the biggest insolvency company in Malaysia. They are in there. The lawyers who work for such companies are not in courtrooms. They are drafting documents behind the scenes. So think, maybe what we need to do as lawyers is to change our own mindset in the process. But you've got a very important point. And guess what? What you call a stigma is something I've been fighting all my life as a legal educator, saying to parents, please stop thinking of a courtroom. There are many rooms out there. It's not just a courtroom.
It's not just about courtroom.
Yeah, it's not just about a courtroom. There's a classroom. There's a boardroom. We have many rooms. And so it's interesting. Please, another question.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Another question from Amir Atif. Hello, Prof.
Yes.
As a fresh graduate later on, especially in this current time, should we specialize or generalize our field of practice? What would be the pro and cons of each category? Thank you, Prof.
Now, I would suggest that specializing is better. Now, what's interesting is that whether you like it or not, if you join a big law firm, you specialize anyway. The only time you don't specialize is if you work for a small law firm in the city or one of the suburbs in Malaysia. But if you work for a big law firm, whether you like it or not, they put you in corporate commercial, they put you in mergers and acquisitions, they put you in bankruptcy and insolvency, or they could put you somewhere in property acquisitions, in hotels, hospitality. So whatever you like, you specialize. The real problem, and that's the beautiful part of your question, is, so should you start now? Should you market yourself as a specialist? I say yes. Now, if I was a law student today, I didn't do that before. If I was a law student today, I would market myself as a specialist. It's a question of how you write your CV. And in fact, any big project you did, use it. Normally, if you did
perhaps their project paper when
exactly.
they did, yes, project paper, yes.
Yes. So this is what I advise my students. So when a student comes to do a project, I say to them, listen, forget a project for a minute. Let's think of the future. What are you thinking of doing later? because what you're thinking of doing later, we can use your project for that. So when we look at the project you're going to do or what you've done, we use it as a basis, because let's face it, if you did your project on a particular area, you are actually a mini expert on that subject anyway. So I've had students who've done esoteric, interesting things. And in fact, one of my students actually did some work on blockchain. That was about 6 years ago. Interesting. At the time, I didn't even know about blockchain anyway. In fact, it looks very funny, to be honest. But what's interesting is, I said, there's a blockchain thing. Why don't you do it? Because, we're talking future. She did it. She went to a very big company called, Baker McKenzie. And I said,
yes.
just put on your CV that your main area of interest and expertise is blockchain technology and da-da-da-da-da. I said, you know what? Anybody who reads it would like to talk to you. They say, come, just come and talk to us, because that's the future. So you've got a very good point that should be specialized. I would, if I were you, because you see, there are too many law students out there anyway. There are two things you sell as a law student. You sell your grades and you sell your background. Your grades are hopefully okay or good. So once you get past the grades, we then have to look what you bring. And let's face it, law firms want you, not because they love you, because they think you can help them to make money. That's the reality. So if that's the case, what are you bringing? I usually say to my students, so what are you bringing to the table? I mean, what are you bringing to the law firm? What do you bring with you? I mean, why should we hire you? So if I were you, it's a very good question. Why? I mean, I've got 50 students. Why you? What's so good about you anyway? So your job is to say, guess what? I'm so good. Because one of my projects was on insolvency, and I can help a lot on this subject. In fact, blah, 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 blah. Explain. Or if you say, listen, I've specialized a lot in financial technology issues, or I've done some work on environment, but it's not just environment. Don't think I'm a greenie as such. We all should be greenies, but actually what I'm looking at is companies and how they interact with people and the environment, focusing on the social impact and so on. If I was going to look for a job with Petronas, for instance, I'll be going to talk to them about the fact that, it's part of corporate social responsibility to be interested in the environment. So please, this is my area. You asked an interesting question by saying, what is the downside? Now, the downside, obviously, is the fact that maybe you cannot move out of the area. But lawyers who become senior lawyers in big firms actually become very specialized, and they don't tend to move out. Because if you keep moving out too often, in the process, you don't become that good. You become, in fact, one of my young lawyers here in town, my former research assistant, he's a construction lawyer. Now think about it, construction lawyer. And if you look at Malaysia, take any big city, from KL to Penang to any major city, major construction works. Guess what? At the back of any major construction work, there's a group of lawyers. Lawyers doing everything from the roads to the construction works about the buildings and the supply chain issues. So the question is, can you make yourself an expert? I advise my students at the time that look carefully at construction law, because we don't teach it in law schools. We should, but we don't. And so guess what? This boy is now, he's a young boy, about 28. He's now one of Sydney's good, if not one of the best construction law experts. He's what we call a senior associate. Now, the downside is that he's now in there. And the question is, can he move? And I said to him, why do you want to move? Stay there. Stay there, please. You're a good construction lawyer. Become a partner, stay there. So that's the bad side. If you lose your job, can you get another one? That's the bad side.
Yes,
but then that bad side is with any company. But let me tell you about the other side of being a generalist. If you're a generalist, you are not usually taken too seriously. A generalist is only good working for a small law firm that doesn't have enough work, and so they will do anything, from family law to conveyancing. A bit of insolvency, and even with insolvency, if it's too small a firm, if it's a big insolvency issue, they go to a big firm anyway. So if you're a generalist, there's a problem. You cannot work usually for a bigger law firm or a firm that pays well. You end up working for a much smaller firm. So if I was you today, Yes, a generalist means you can do many things. That's the advantage. But the disadvantage is that, what do you mean you can do many things? You mean you're a jack of all trade and master of none? What we want is, what any law firm wants is a lawyer who has the prospect of becoming a senior associate, because once you do your pupillage, I like to think you proceed on, and the idea is eventually to become a senior associate anyway, and then a partner and so on and so forth. That's if you're working for a private law firm. But if you're going to join the government, then you go to sell yourself as someone who is able to offer good advice. For instance, one of the things I've been talking about in Surabaya is something called public-private partnerships. And I tell students that, look at all the big roads in this country, look at the new toll roads. These are all constructed using public-private partnerships. But we don't tend to teach it in law schools as such. We need practitioners who are experts in this. Maybe that's what we need. And so, yes, there are downsides to being a specialist. There are downsides to being a generalist. But if I was advising you, I would say, please start early, be a specialist. But there's a joke. They say, it doesn't matter what you do, just demonstrate you are the best in the area. That's my advice. So do what you want, pick it up, but demonstrate that when it comes to this topic, you are one of the best, if not the best. You are very young now. I think most of you will be between 22 to 28. Now, this is a great time to actually specialize. But someone will tell you that you will not be advised to specialize because you are too young. And I say the opposite. I said, if you're too young, this is the best time to do it. When you get too old, you can't specialize anyway. No one takes you seriously. We want to catch you raw and young. So we train you to be the specialist that you should be. I hope this answers your question.
Thank you, Prof. They're very great answers. Okay, because this is a time for them for use their knowledge and then their hard work when they did their project paper when they were in second year.
Let me, talking about project paper, let me make a very, very important point about that. One of the saddest things about project papers, as a law professor, I've been arguing about this for so long. Students spend so much time doing project papers, and then what happens afterwards? Nothing.
Yes, nothing.
I keep saying, are we stupid? What's wrong with us? Your students spend so much time and nothing. So when a student comes to me, I say, hey, let's think. You're going to spend a lot of time doing this. So we're going to make use of it. I want you to be able to later walk into a law office and say, I did this project. I know this area. Take me. I'm your best choice. So that project paper you did, you're going to do. Please make use of it.
Put that in the resume, right? In the CV.
Put it in the resume. That resume. Shake it up, make it look good.
Good answer, Prof. Okay, move on. The next question from Afrini. Hi, Prof. You did mention about what will clients want for the future lawyers. What about on the matter of what will employers want from the future lawyers? What qualities should the lawyer of the future has, especially during this current pandemic where it might be impossible or difficult? Difficult for them to get a place for pupillage.
This is a very important issue. In fact, I touched a bit on it earlier in my discussion, because I've been doing a lot of research on what lawyers want, and law recruiters are talking about it now. Law recruiters are asking law firms, what do they want to see? Now, this is a major issue for me when I was setting up the law school, because my argument for setting up the law school in 2015 was that law firms complain too much that lawyers don't come with any skills. They said lawyers were not job ready. So when they leave law school, and they gave me very interesting examples. They say some students have distinctions, but they can't draft a contract. Some students have distinctions, but they have never even seen a conveyancing deed before. Some students have distinctions, but they can't really they don't know anything about environmental law. Yes, that's because practice of law tends to be sometimes different from the classroom type of thing we talk. And so our job is to bring the two together. So your question is, how do we know what law firms want? Now, what law firms are saying today, in my slide earlier, was that they're saying they just don't want lawyers who just draft contracts and interpret legislation. They say they want more. You know what they are saying? They say, hey, if I pay, I want more. It makes sense. And they're using the corona.
Money.
Yeah. Hey,
Bring more
you want
money.
to pay. Exactly. I pay, I want more. It's like you pay one, I call it, there's a joke for it. It's like you're paying money for a hamburger, but you want a whole big steak. You want a whole big restaurant, but you pay small money. But that's what lawyers are saying. So what we know is that employers today are saying they want lawyers who not only interpret legislation and draft contracts, but also demonstrate a good, broad advisory capacity on their business. So what I'm saying here then is that the type of lawyers we need for the future are lawyers who have a broader range of ideas. So we just don't want somebody who just knows contract and torts, but we want people who are able to use their contracts and torts to talk about a broader general environment. So your question, to be more specific in answering it, is that law firms do what clients want. But clients are saying they want lawyers who are broad in terms of their ability to advise. So if you're an insolvency lawyer, for instance, they say, yes, that's what we want. But as an insolvency lawyer, we want you to demonstrate an understanding of a business environment in which we operate. If you're a financial technology expert, we want you to be able to demonstrate a broader understanding of how this is what has brought us to where we are. So to make it a bit better for students then, if I was doing a research, if I was to write my resume today looking for what the company wants, I like to think you do that already, actually, because before you send your resume to a company, you do a bit of research about the company to see what they want. If you don't, you are making a mistake, obviously, because you do a bit of research, find what they want, and then make sure your CV is crafted to reflect what they want, because it makes sense. Now, if that's the case, what they want is what is reflected by their customers' demands. So what I'm saying to you now, in the COVID environment and in the post-COVID environment later, is that right now, what firms are looking for and are hiring and would want to keep hiring are students with expertise on bankruptcy, insolvency, restructuring, and litigation, because we are in a bad business environment. And bad business environment requires skilled lawyers who are able to litigate, negotiate, restructure, and look for ways to assist clients to get out of this. And the truth is that as I talk now, right now, business is booming for companies that specialize in deliveries. Business is booming for companies that specialize in e-learning and e-electronics and communication. Business is booming for any company that's in construction and so on. So my advice is quite emphatic. We do what clients want, but what clients want is becoming increasingly obvious. They want someone who just doesn't interpret legislation, but someone who can demonstrate an expertise with specific niche areas which is being dictated by this current economy. And that current economy is the COVID type economy. I hope this helps.
Okay, next question from Fazwin.
Fazwin.
Okay, Prof. Although virtual classes, meeting, etc., are more convenient in many ways, I think we should also take into consideration the human aspect of it. It seems that when everything is done online, it feels like the concept of time just doesn't exist. The 9 to 5 office hour kind of isn't there anymore. Well, at least here in Malaysia, I'm not sure how it is there with you, Prof. Wouldn't you agree?
Assume I'll agree. I'll very much agree with you, actually. That I'll agree with so many things you've said. One, the 9 to 5 doesn't exist anymore. Two, well, it would be nice to see people, to talk to. I love my students. We like to talk. We like to joke. We sit, have coffee. We cannot do that online anymore. That's true. So what Nazrim is saying is that the social element is gradually missing. That's true. But Nazim, I would like you to look at another angle. And please think about this. You know, long ago, before books were introduced, people used to sit and talk and quietly as families. And when books were introduced, people say, now look at it. People are never talking. They're only reading their books. Of course, now we took book reading as important as normal. Then, of course, before phones came, people used to, of course, talk a lot. They read books, and parents were very happy. And then the phones came, telephones came, and parents complain like hell. They say now kids have become antisocial. They don't talk to anybody. And now, look, they don't even read anything. And I say to people, actually, kids are reading a lot. Except maybe they don't want to read what you want, but they're reading a lot. Because your average child reads so much. Maybe not what we want because they're always reading something on Facebook. But I joked with one parent and said, maybe kids are not talking to 5 people in the house. They're usually talking to about 60, 100 people on TikTok, or they are talking about 1,000 people on WhatsApp. Who knows? Because now the framework for communication has become broader, but not in the way we knew it before. Things have changed. So what Nazim is saying is right, that society is changing and that the social element of face-to-face interaction is actually very beautiful and very useful, but somehow online is destroying that because online is making us very impersonal. That is true. And so what some of us are saying is that online is good, but maybe we also need to see how we can enhance online with better social interaction. Now, during the COVID era, people have done strange things. Somebody gave an Oprah show online. Somebody has done a whole concert online. People are trying to do different things online. We give, of course, lectures online. But what Nazrim is saying is that, yes, it's nice, but it's not the same. Let's face it. I agree. Now, the problem we have is, to what extent can we adapt and make our online experience as good as, if not better than, our normal social experience? Or should we redefine our social experience? I had a situation where somebody was going to visit their parent and they couldn't. Somebody died and they couldn't go to the funeral. And they said there was going to be an online funeral. Excuse me? Online funeral? How do you do this? So you can just see everybody staring at the screen online, and we all cry online, and we all bury online. How is that possible? So yes, you do have a very valid point. It is the reality of today's situation. My view is that in the post-corona environment, we will still retain aspects of online teaching, online gatherings, but we will always come back and interspace it with the social element of actual face-to-face fun. Someone said something strange the other day. They said, you know what I miss? I miss personal hug, personal touch. And I laughed. I said, yep. If only artificial intelligence would actually introduce something like that, it will work. But we are not there yet. And so you got a valid point. There is a downside to the current technology. The downside is that human element. Somehow, it doesn't matter how we develop with computers. It doesn't matter how we develop with Zoom. That human element, it's always going to be important. We can come together on this screen and see all the pictures we want to see. But really, that touch, that face-to-face, that smile that you can only get in the normal environment is always going to be missing. And as someone says, as human beings, you know what? We are social animals. It doesn't matter. I'm sure in Malaysia, every now and again, you catch up with your friends on social media using WhatsApp or Facebook. But still, you meet them for coffee. That's before Corona, of course. Even when you can meet them every night on social media, you still catch up for coffee anyway. Because somehow, that social element is important. And so you've got a valid point. We have a problem. But I'm hoping, as some of us are saying, that in the post-corona period, we would come together, we would bring the online and the face-to-face human thing together to make the most of it. I hope it helps.
Thank you, Prof. We have 3 more questions, and then we have 5 more minutes because they have another class at 10.
I thought this was only class. I'm so hurt. Fine. Okay.
I will be quick. So there's
Okay.
one question from Jax. Jax
That's
asks you, hello, Prof. It's really inspiring to hear how passionate you are about the law. I was wondering, as can I discover my own passion and drive in law? Good question.
that's a, that's a nice question, actually. I'm passionate. Yes. Passion is what drives us. I always say to my students, if you're not passionate about anything, maybe you shouldn't be in it. Passion, passion, passion. These are the three words for you. Now, your question is, how do you develop that passion? I say you develop the passion by finding what you like to do most and then delivering it to your heart's content. I always say to somebody, I said a joke to my student the other day that the student said to me, how do you know you're passionate? I said, you know you are passionate when you feel suffocated if you can't talk about it. It's like you're underwater and you can't breathe. And until you get that feeling, you're not passionate enough. So just, yes, passion. And the way you develop passion is to pick on what you like and do it to your heart content. I said, as Siti said, we have only 5 minutes. I wish I could talk about passion because it's my big tool.
Yes.
And so
Because
it's a good
we
question.
can,
Yeah.
because we can see your passion when you talk about legal education. This is your passion. So
Yes,
I think
I'm passionate.
that is what Jack's one with.
That's so I'm passionate because I said, you feel like talking about it. In fact, you almost feel like you have a mission. You know, when you get that, I have a mission feeling, you're in business. You need to, in fact, I always say to young lecturers when they talk to me for advice, I said, students are not stupid, you know, when they are listening to you, they look at your face, they look at your mood. If you're not passionate, they don't listen. You've got to be passionate because passion is infectious. Passion inspires. I always say, good teachers teach, better teachers explain, but great teachers inspire. So that's what we talk about.
That's a nice quote, Prof. Okay. Move to Faris. Faris' question is, so what is your advice for students who want to specialize in niche area of law? Where do we start?
You start yesterday. You start yesterday if you can.
You are philosophers first, Prof. You are a philosophers.
Now, you start.
Philosophies here.
Yeah, you start as quickly as possible. You know what? I wish I was young again. If I was young again, I'll start, specialize in an area. People always ask me, what's your biggest regret? My biggest regret is never started anything early enough. So you've got an amazing opportunity now. Start now. Pick an area you like. It doesn't have to be insolvency. I know you are doing insolvency now. It doesn't have to be insolvency. But if it is, so be it. My job and my point to you is that pick an area you like, specialize on it. Make sure you let everyone know you know this area. Read on it, write on it, do a blog on it. It's okay. Even if no one reads, it's your blog anyway. So your point is, how do we start? When do we start? We start yesterday. But today it's not too late. So let's do it. Let's do our 3 lives in one. The past, the present, and the future. Let's bring them together today and start it now if you can. It will be good then. Go home. Well, you're home now anyway. But begin thinking about it. Where do I start? What can I do? What do I really want to do? If you find yourself asking, what do I really want to do? It's a good start because it means you're thinking. So what do I really want to do? And you know what? Your lecturers are there to help. Have a chat to them. They may think you're a nuisance, but a student is meant to be a nuisance. Go and talk to them. They help. All right, so start.
Nuisance. Okay.
Yes, the lecturers, so your students are nuisance, but they are the nuisance we must have, and they're good in our lives.
Yes, student is our life.
Exactly.
Okay, next question, last question from Mohaimin. Hello, Prof. If in the future lawyers are working from home and only meet their client online, will it affect the emotional connection a lawyer has with his client? For example, the feeling of trust and confidence a client has towards his lawyer. Speaking in the perspective of social study, would you think that it is still important to meet the client physically, even though in the advanced technology era?
I think so. I agree with you. You have to meet with the client personally. Indeed, I've worked with people that I have never met, and it's always strange. When they see us, oh, that's you, Sam. That's good. Hello. Yeah, but it's not the same, is it? You want to shake their hands. Now, you said something about the emotional connection. I like to think of the word emotional connection differently, because we lawyers are not supposed to be that emotionally attached. We do our work. But I think what you meant was, and you explained it, you meant by saying the trust and the connection. That's an important element. You want that trust. You want your client to believe in you. You want your client to believe you can actually deliver. The deliverables are possible. You are right. Without meeting someone face to face, how do you deliver? I think it doesn't matter what we do about Zoom meetings and Zoom conferences, you will still eventually need to meet a client to see what it is they want. Now, it's not going to be unusual for people to travel from Penang to Malay to Kuala Lumpur in some months to meet people, because you have to. I think that maybe the corona now is setting us apart, but I do not think Zoom would replace that face-to-face contact forever. It shows it's possible to meet, but it doesn't tell us that it's not necessary to meet. So remember this. Online tells us that it's possible to meet in the most difficult circumstances, but it doesn't mean that online says it's not necessary to meet. So at best, the online situation we have now becomes a complement to what we already need to do. But it makes it possible in circumstances we couldn't do it. In the past, we couldn't have met if we had a problem, but today we can. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't meet if we can meet anyway. So you have a point that in actual fact, we need to maintain that social connection in which clients can actually trust us, seeing us, shaking our hands, knowing what we can deliver. So you've got a good point, but please remember these 2 points. One point is the online experience shows it's possible to meet in difficult circumstances. Point number 2, the online experience doesn't mean we don't ever need to meet if we can. We should meet if we can. And I hope this answers your question.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you. That is very amazing. Okay, I really, this is the best sessions.
Oh, this is so nice.
Yeah, because you are very passionate.
So nice.
Yes,
it's so nice.
2 hours, and we didn't realize. We didn't realize it's already 2 hours.
But remember what the students were saying? Time has stopped for us. Time doesn't matter. We're in the future now.
So we're in the future now. Okay.
We're in the future people. So it doesn't matter. Okay. But it's been my pleasure. It's been my great pleasure. Okay. And I'm sorry you had to wake up early, but I'm pleased that it's your normal lecture time anyway. So it's okay.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thanks for the invitation.
Thank you so much for your idea, for your sharing. This is very important for the students, very inspiring for the students. I hope they can get more input from you. And then I really hope that I can invite you in the future for a larger groups, not only for 2 classes so like this.
No problem at all. It's been my pleasure.
You're very passionate about this topic.
Good luck, because you guys are in your final year, and we had a bit of a chat before we came online to talk to you guys, and I know you're hoping to do your pupillage. And remember what we've said: niche, niche, niche. Prepare, prepare, prepare. The time is never too late, and if you ask me when you should start preparing, my answer is simple: yesterday will be a good idea, but today is not bad.
The students say, Mohammed and Nadia says, thank you so much. Thank you very much, Prof. Blay.
Okay.
And then I think we need to take photo with the student.
Hey, this is good. This is what you're talking about. How do we have that emotional connection and take a picture together? This is good. I like this. I like to see how you do it.
Yes, student, can you on your video so that we can take a group photo with Prof. Blay, and then you can say something to Prof. Blay, what you want to say, because Prof, frankly speaking, I'm really happy today because you did amazing things today for the students. And it is actually, this is my
class. Why
class.
does she always talk so nicely? She's good, isn't it? You're a great teacher because you talk so well.
Thank you. Let me off you off the spotlight, cancel the spotlight so that.
Okay, I can see you now.
Okay, so everyone. Okay, so we can have a photo. Yes, everyone is here. Please on your microphone so that you can say thank you to Prof. Say
This is
what.
Thank
say
you
what-
very much, Prof. Thank you. Thank
hey,
you very
thanks,
much.
guys.
Thank you, Prof.
Have a great day, okay?
Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, you
And,
too. Have a great day too.
and I hope you
Thank
have
you,
a
Prof.
great morning. Thanks. Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
one last photo. One last photo for us. Get ready. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Are you
Thank
sure
you,
you took a
Prof.
good picture? Okay.
I'll send you the photo, Prof. Don't worry.
Okay. Okay. Take care.
Take care, Prof. Thank you. Thank you so much. And then
Bye.
I hope we can meet again in Surabaya or in Sydney soon.
Hey, that's good. So you said, I hope you can meet again, not online.
Not online. I need to see you personally. I really hope.
Because what your student was saying was correct. That hey, this online business is good, but please, social.
Yes, we need to see physically.
Okay, take care. I know you have
Okay,
another
take care,
class.
Prof. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, student, for being here 2 hours. Thank you so much, students.
Okay, take care now. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.